The Sports Renegades podcast on SportsTownChicago.com.
Say what's on my mind at any given time of day, cause I'm a renegade. Never been afraid to holler about anything.
Welcome into the Sports Renegades here on SportsTownChicago.com. I'm Ryan Stuprich.
And I'm Ryan Risky, and we spent the first hour of the show talking about NBA Finals 73-9 and what it means, how far away are the Bulls from competing for a title. And now in the second hour of the show, we're kind of getting more onto the baseball side of town. And I think we're going to start with the not-so-good baseball, as the White Sox are now 33-36 this season, somehow only 5.5 games out of first place. And, you know, the record 33-36 doesn't sound terrible, except with the way they've been losing games since this trend of losing started after the 23-10 start. The losses have been so bad and so embarrassing and so frustrating that fans are now calling for the heads of Robin Ventura, Rick Hahn, Kenny Williams, and Jerry Reinsdorf. It's not looking good right now for the White Sox. And then you hear a report last week from John Heyman that Robin Ventura is on the hot seat and that he's definitely worrying about his job security, and that if the White Sox end up making a move, they'd be promoting Rick Renteria from bench coach to manager. And Rick Hahn and Kenny Williams both declined to comment on the subject.
Yeah, I'm not sure that they're going to do that in season. I think it would be after the season that they is when they would make a move.
Right, and
because I think it's almost too late. Like, I don't think this team's going to go to the playoffs. Detroit's getting better, Cleveland's getting better, Kansas City, is always going to be there. So I don't think the Sox. I know they're only 5.5 out of the division lead somehow, amazingly, being 3 games under 500. But the way that they've been losing obviously makes it seem worse. And I just don't think a move like that's going to happen in season.
Yeah, and Ventura's contract is up at the end of the year, and they might just let it play out, except Rick Hahn and Jerry Reinsdorf both said they're going all in this season to make the playoffs.
Good luck with that. I don't know how you can, especially at this point, how you can say that. I know it's early, but, Kansas City's better than you. And the Indians just swept you in Cleveland. And they're pretty much, if you go, toe-to-toe with them, they're pretty similar, but I think the Indians are probably a better team overall. And then you have Detroit, who the Sox should be better than, but they can't seem to beat them.
No, and even in series that they have Sale and Quintana pitching against Detroit, they find a way to lose those games. And it's just one of those things. They started off so good, and then there was a little talk that maybe they should get Ventura's contract extension done. And
could you imagine if they did that? How mad people would be now.
Well, one of the things I've been enjoying doing after White Sox losses, or even during games they're getting blown out, is checking White Sox Twitter. And when they tweet out game updates, almost every single tweet is #FireRobin, or people saying fire Robin, people saying they're not spending another penny on Sox tickets until they fire Robin or get this mess cleaned up.
So is that why people aren't showing up? Is that why people aren't showing up to the park? People never show up to the park anyway.
I don't know. And then now a lot of them are saying fire Hahn, fire Kenny.
I think for me it's more of a fire Kenny thing. I think if Rick Hahn was on his own, I'm not saying he's a great general manager, and I'm not saying that he doesn't have a lot to say, but I really think it's Kenny Williams just saying, we can compete this year. And I think if Rick Hahn was on his own, he'd be more tempted to start a rebuild, at least a part of a rebuild. And I think for the most part, White Sox fans would understand.
Right, and as we know, the Kenny Williams way is just to try to plug some pieces in.
It worked once in 2005 with you, Kenny. It worked once, and you had a pretty good young team then, too. With a lot of good veterans that were sprinkled in. He's only won one World Series, and he himself is acting like a god.
And that's another good point. He's won 1 World Series. They've had 2 playoff appearances since 2005.
Yep.
And then when you look at it that way, it's just kind of like, this is the same thing going on as the Bulls.
Yeah.
And they're ironically...
It is. It's eerily similar,
They're
too.
ironically owned by the same guy, and they're both in the same situation. And
Pretty
it's
much, yeah.
Very bad situation. And it's not working. You're going to have to go on a full-out rebuild. I think if the White Sox went out and said, we're going to go on a full-out rebuild, like the Cubs did, I think a lot of fans would understand.
Sure.
Because now...
Because they see it happening in their own town on the north side.
Right. And not only that, they probably understand, this way hasn't been working. And it not only is it not working, the team is getting worse. They're big for... Todd Frazier has 19 home runs this year.
Did you know he's batting like 198?
Yes.
What the heck is up with that?
He is batting below the Mendoza line. I remember before the season when we had Paul Chiavari on the show, he said he just hoped that Todd Frazier was not just their right-handed hitting Adam Dunn.
That's what he's turning into, especially now. He was productive early, but now, with the offense kind of, stopping, he's sort of stopping with it.
I know, and I've seen, after they got swept, when I looked at White Sox Twitter, a lot of people were calling for Frazier to be moved to 9th in the order. They said they're tired of an automatic out being cleanup.
Well, your third baseman shouldn't be batting 9th, but that's for sure. But again, this is another poor... I'm not going to say that it's a horrible move for the White Sox because, at the time, that seemed like a pretty good move. A lot of people were afraid, though, because, last year in Cincinnati, he had a great first half, made the All-Star team, won the Home Run Derby with his team. In his team's park, I should say, and then he was pretty bad in that second half.
See, he has not been the same hitter since he played in that Home Run Derby, and that's just another example of guys not having the same swing that they have since the Home Run Derby. I guess
it's a good thing that Anthony Rizzo and Chris Bryant didn't do very well in that Home Run Derby because, if they kept swinging, maybe they would have had the same fate as Todd Frazier.
And I know Chris Bryant said that neither of them are doing it this year. They said it was too tiring.
Yeah, and I completely understand. I'm not going to, obviously we can't be upset about that. The only Cubs player I would like to see in Home Run Derby would be like Schwarber or something. I think that would be really cool to see, just because he hits so many bombs. But going back to the Sox, that was just another move, another offseason move that Kenny Williams made. It's a win now mentality there. It's been that way ever since Kenny Williams was there. It worked once. They had a great season in 2006, but didn't get to the postseason. And then after that, they just had the one good year in 2008. Where they won late and made the playoffs. But, I think people realized they weren't going to go anywhere that year.
Right. In 2012, they had a great season before they fell apart at the end. They were in first place 117 days.
So we see a pattern here. I mean, there's a pattern of one good year and 2 or 3 bad years and then maybe another good year. But, it's not enough to get them to the playoffs because they don't have enough talent on the team.
And the problem with that is they're not good at drafting and developing players, so they're not able to call guys up. They just called up Tim Anderson, they called up Carlos Rodon last year, except a couple of guys isn't enough. You've got to have the depth at AAA to be able to to trade some guys.
That's the thing. And they got James Shields, and they just got rid of Eric Johnson for James Shields. Eric Johnson was one of their good prospects.
Yeah, I mean, he had struggled at the major league level. He didn't fit in with U.S. Cellular Field. He struggled with San Diego. Except, they don't have the talent.
I don't think it's the guy that you give up on so early.
Right. It's tough because they don't have any guys to call up, and then that means that not only do they not have guys to call up, they don't have the guys to trade to acquire some more talent.
Right. And then, what was the point of signing Matt Latos if you cut him 2 months into the season? What was the point of signing Jimmy Rollins if you cut him 2 months into the season? It just, it doesn't make any sense.
It was kind of funny. I was talking to one of my friends about this. The White Sox downfall kind of started right after they cut Danks. They got rid of their worst player.
True. I mean, that's a good point. And, at this point, he'd be better than Shields or Latos was at least Latos those last, 3 or 4 starts. I agree. It's, that kind of started with everything. And, let's not forget that the White Sox, during spring training, right before the season started, that they were in trouble themselves with that whole Adam LaRoche thing and Drake LaRoche and all that. That was a big distraction before the season started, and then the season started and they got off to a great start, and everyone forgot about that.
That was distant memory,
right.
Except now that good start is even more distant.
Yeah,
than the LaRoche situation was during that good start to the season.
Right.
My friends literally have forgotten about that. They just are used to the same old White Sox being terrible every year, finding ways to lose games.
Obviously, if they still had Adam LaRoche, it wouldn't make any difference whatsoever. He was playing bad, and I think his time was done. I think he was close to retirement anyway. At least that's the feeling I got, and that's the feeling that I got from him when he was talking about it. It didn't seem like he was so excited to be a White Sox player. So I don't know. But what I do know is that rebuilds work, especially in baseball. Saw with the Cubs, the Astros are starting to get hot again, and they were great last year.
The Phillies are going into one of their own rebuilds.
Phillies are going into a rebuild, and we can see all the great talent that they have, and they've been hanging around, and they could be in the playoffs, in a few years possibly. We just know that homegrown talent works. All these great players that you see in baseball, they all came from a great farm system for the most part. Look at the St. Louis Cardinals. That team is all built for the most part on farm systems, and it's been that way for years and years and years. And they go to the playoffs almost every year. Exactly,
and they're in the hunt for the wild card race right now. And another thing, with homegrown talent, you also kind of have to get lucky with which years you were really bad. Or you
Sure.
and I touched on this last week. How lucky were the Cubs for the season they lost 102 games? That the next year was the year that Chris Bryant was eligible for the draft.
Very, very lucky, and that was a great thing. And also in 2012 when they traded Andrew Kashner for Anthony Rizzo. At the time, people were probably like, oh, why do we get rid of Andrew Kashner? He's a great young arm. Well, we've seen what happened since he's been there. He's been riddled with injuries. He's not playing that well. And we got Anthony Rizzo, pretty much the best first baseman next to Paul Goldschmidt in the National League.
And then right now, that right there, that's Anthony Rizzo and Chris Bryant. A right hand, those two are probably the number one 3-4 combo in baseball. And not only is it just a 3-4 combo, you got the righty and the lefty power bat right there in that middle of the order.
Right. And so the point is, rebuilds work, and it's working, and the White Sox need to think about it. But as long as Kenny Williams is there, I'm not sure that that's going to happen. And, of course, James Shields, we'll talk about this before break. James Shields is just unbelievably bad. He was bad that last start with San Diego, and he gave up 8 runs again over the weekend. It's ridiculous.
And he's making his next start. And back to the rebuild, as you just touched on, the rebuilds work, except you have to have the right guy leading that rebuild. And I do not think Kenny Williams and Rick Hahn are the guys for that with the White Sox. They need to find someone from outside the organization that has kind of had a history of doing that. Find some executive. The Cubs brought in Theo Epstein. The Dodgers brought in Andrew Friedman from the Tampa Bay Rays.
Mm-hmm. Right.
You need to find someone from an organization that's good at scouting and that'll bring in some good minor league coordinators to help develop these players when you draft them. Because the Sox have been drafting a lot of high school players. They like to draft these toolsy guys like Tim Anderson and Courtney Hawkins. And, when they're taking a position player with their early picks, they usually go for the toolsy guys, and then they don't pan out because they don't have the guys to develop them. Then they like to go the college pitcher route. They've done it with Chris Sale, Carlos Rodon, Carson Fulmer.
Right.
Those are 3 great picks. Except those picks we've just touched on, that's not enough. You have to be able to find guys throughout the entire draft. Find guys that you can develop into quality guys like the Cubs. You might have just found that gem in Wilson Contreras.
It certainly looks like it. First pitch he sees, home run.
Right, and he won the batting title last year at Double-A. He was raking Double-A or Triple-A pitching.
The Cubs saw a need, that they needed a catcher, and they need a long-term resolution for catcher. They haven't had that since like Michael Barrett. So it's been a long time, and Soto never panned out. Right. So they saw a need. He was raking in the minor leagues. They call him up, and hopefully he continues to do well. And, next year he should probably be the starting catcher, you would think.
Right, and they brought him up to learn from David Ross and Miguel